good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a new deck tech for you coming from Jumpstart 2022. As you might have guessed from my cosplay, we are doing Auntie Blyte Bad Influence. This card is really awesome. It's one of my favorite commanders to come out from that set, along with Kibo, who we already did. And if you don't know what Auntie Blyte Bad Influence does, she is a 2/2 flyer for 3 mana that says whenever a source you control deals damage to you, put that many counters on Auntie Blyte, and then for 1 colorless, 1 red and a tap, and remove X counters from Auntie Blyte, she deals that much damage to any target. This is really sweet. It enables a style of deck that we've never seen before, a completely new deck archetype, which is dealing self-inflicted damage in red. And luckily there's a lot of cards in red that do that, so we're going to build around that ability first and foremost. It's just a really fun new angle to build around in Commander. And without further ado, let's get started, and we're starting off with Cemetery Gatekeeper, which is going to be great in this deck. It is providing a little bit of graveyard hate, but then anytime any player plays one of those cards that have been exiled with it, they're going to take 2 damage. And obviously we want to be dealing damage to ourselves in this deck, so we probably want to target artifacts or lands to make sure that we're taking damage every single turn. We could also do creatures, but we're not running that many creatures in this deck. Incidentally, it's also going to hurt our opponents, which is really nice. A big theme with this deck is stuff that's going to deal damage to us, but it's also going to deal damage to our opponents, so we're slowly whittling them down till we can finish them off with our ante. And then we have Circuit Mender, which is really good in this deck. We need ways to gain back life. I'm not going to lie. We're going to be dealing a lot of damage to ourselves, so there's a lot of life gain in this deck. This is a pretty good source of life gain that's also going to draw us a card. Eidolon of the Great Revel is going to be great here. We're going to deal a ton of damage to ourselves with this. Yes! But then also our opponents are going to find it really annoying to play their cheap stuff. This is just a great card. Filigree Familiar is essentially another copy of Circuit Mender. Firesling is a really good pinger in this deck because it's going to hit us for 1 every time it pings something. There's also a nice combo we can do with Fiend Lash, where we can equip that onto our ante when she has a lot of counters on her, and then ping her with this guy, and then she is going to deal that much damage to target player or planeswalker without removing the counters. So that's really, really sweet. Goblin Artillery can do the same combo. It's also a decent removal spell in this deck. It's repeatable. We can keep picking off small things from our opponents and hitting us for 3 each time. Heartless Hitetsugu is going to deal a ton of damage to us and to each other player as well. So that's a great way to grow our ante really quickly. Orcish Artillery is basically the same as Goblin Artillery. Spectral Sentinel can be really nice to protect us when we're playing against heavy multicolor decks. We can have something that just keeps blocking. But mostly we have it in there because whenever anyone plays a non-basic land, it's going to gain us a life. That is really nice, because again we need a lot of ways to recoup the life that we're losing. Toralf, God of Fury, is very good with a couple of cards in the deck. It works very well with Blasphemous Act or any of our board wipes that deal damage to all of the creatures on the board. It can actually KO some players out of nowhere, so that would already be good enough. But then it's also good with Auntie Blyte because it means that we can use her ability to target a creature and then still have the extra damage spill over to something else, which is very good. Torbrand, Thran of Redfell, is fantastic for dealing more damage to us. All of these cards that deal 1 damage to stuff or 2 damage are suddenly going to be dealing a bunch more, growing our ante much more, and just dealing way more damage overall. Volcano Hellion can enable us to win out of nowhere. So imagine we have our ante out with a lifelink equipment on her, and then we just play this and basically just pay almost all of our life. Our ante's going to get huge. We're going to immediately tap her to remove the counters and shoot somebody for 1,000,000 and then gain all that life back. So it's just really, really good in this deck. Wormcoil Engine is there to gain us some life. It's going to gain us nice big chunks of life, so it's really, really good. And even if they deal with it the first time, we're still going to have another way to gain back some life. Zozu the Punisher is going to keep hitting us for 2 every turn. We like that. And then it's also going to annoy our opponents a little bit as well. Here are your mana rocks first. You need mana rocks in every deck, so please remember to run them. Next, we're moving on to artifacts. We have Alamoret's Archive. We have a few ways to draw cards, but we have a lot of ways to draw life. So this is going to be doubling both of those, which is going to make it very solid in this deck. If you have this out and then play a Faithless Looting, for example, you're drawing 4 and discarding 2. It's just so good. Ankh of Mishra basically does the same thing as Zozu the Punisher. Basilisk's Collar is one of multiple cards that give our commander lifelink. That's pretty important in this deck. Battle Mage's Braces are really, really good. They're going to give haste, which obviously is awesome, but then you're going to be able to double your activated abilities. We have a lot of those in this deck, and particularly our commanders. Druidic Satchel is a card that I actually think is very good in this deck, because since we're not running many creatures, we're probably not going to get the 1/1 often, which is the mode we're least interested in. The other 2 modes are very good. If we get a non-land, non-creature, we're going to gain 2 life, which we're happy happy with in this deck, and otherwise we're going to get to ramp a card. So that is very, very solid. Endless Atlas is going to allow us to draw some cards. Fiendlash is one of the best cards in the deck. As I mentioned, it just makes our Auntie very, very dangerous. We have so many ways to ping her or deal like 1 or 2 damage to her that this can just suddenly shoot people for a ton when you have it equipped onto her. Additionally, it just makes her really hard to be chump blocked. So if she swings in and somebody has a 1/1 flying token or something, they can't really block with it because then suddenly you're just dealing a million damage to their face. Loxodon Warhammer gives trample to our Auntie, which is really good, and also gives her lifelink, which we want. Oraska Relic is quite good in this deck. It can just be ramp when we need it to at the beginning of the game, but later on we can gain us 3 life and draw a card. That's also really, really good with Alamaret's Archive, so we just really like this card. Ruby Medallion is going to make a large part of our deck cost 1 cheaper. Shadow Spear, again, is going to give us a little bit of lifelink. It also has a great ability to mess with our opponent's hexproof and indestructible, which can be problematic for us as a red deck. Staff of the Flame Magus is a really weird one, because this is just limited chaff normally. But in this deck, every time we play a Mountain or a red spell, which is, what, 78 cards of our deck, we're going to gain 1 life. We're pretty happy with that, because, again, we need a ton of life in this deck. Sun Droplet is another way to gain life. It's going to be fantastic in this deck. Since we're taking so much damage from basically all of our cards, it's going to store all that damage and then return it to us slowly every upkeep. With Alamaret's Archive out, again, it's going to double, so it's just very nice. Sword of War and Peace is another way to get some life back and also deal direct damage to our opponents. It also provides some nice protection against 2 pretty relevant colors. Thought Prison is a pretty interesting one. We could look at somebody's hand, exile something. We probably want to exile something around 2 or 3 mana cost. So then every time any player plays something that costs that much, they're going to take that much damage, including ourselves. Very solid. Spencer's Journal is basically there to give us a nice little life boost every single upkeep. And we're moving on to enchantments. We have Ancient Rooms, which is going to deal 1 damage to each player at the beginning of their upkeep for each artifact they control. That's very good for us. We're going to take a bunch of damage, and so are our opponents. Hopefully we can get that damage back with lifelink. Bitter Reunion is an excellent new card from Brothers War. It should be in almost every mono red deck. Burning Earth is really nice. We don't run that many non-basics ourselves, but it is still going to affect us a little bit, which is good. We want it to affect us. But for our opponents, it's also going to be really annoying to keep taking damage from this. Citadel of Pain is really good. It's Citadel of Pain is really good. It's pulling double duty. It means that if we leave mana up, we're going to take damage, which we want. It also means that our opponents are unlikely to leave mana up during our turn, which means that we have more free reign to do what we need to do with our Auntie and try to execute our combos. Collapsing Borders is a super interesting one because it punishes monocolor decks such as ourselves, which is interesting. It also works really well with the Alamaret's Archive though, because we are going to be doubling the life gain. Again, it's a really odd card, but it can still mess with our opponents and guarantee that we take some damage. Descent into Avernus is excellent. It's going to be ramping everybody, which is kind of annoying, but we don't care that much. But then it's just going to be dealing increased damage every single turn. We love it in this deck. Mana Bobs is basically the same thing as Burning Earth, but it also hits basics, so it's a little bit better. Mechanized Warfare is going to increase all the damage that red and artifact sources deal. That's basically the entire deck, and having everything deal 1 extra damage in a deck with so much non-combat damage is really good. Pyrostatic Pillar is basically Eidolon of the Great Revel 2.0. Roiling Vortex is going to deal a little bit of damage to each player during each upkeep. We really like that. It's also going to keep people fair by making sure they don't play stuff without paying its mana cost, and then also it has an activated ability that stops players from getting life, so in case somebody tries to recoup all that life that you've dealt to them, you can just counter them with this. Very nice. Spell Shock means that anytime any player plays anything, they're going to take 2 damage. We love that in this deck. And finally we have Visions of Phyrexia, which is going to be very good since we're running so many artifacts. It's card advantage or it's ramp. Both of those are really great. Moving on to instants, we have Bolt Bend, which is a great way to protect our commander. She's almost always going to have 4 power, so this is almost always going to be 1 mana to basically counter a removal spell. Very good. Chaos Warp is just great interaction. We need it in basically every red deck. So is Wild Magic Surge. Char is very good removal in this deck because it's going to deal us 2 damage, but also deal 4 to a creature, which should be enough to remove most of them. Chef's Kiss is another way to protect our commander, and then it also gives us a little bit of additional value as well. Orcish Cannonade is doing the same thing as Orcish Artillery is doing, and it's also going to draw us a card, so it's very nice in this deck. Tibalt's Trickery is a great way to interact with our opponents when they're trying to mess with our combos or deal with our commander. Will's Reversal is often going to be better than Chef's Kiss in this deck because the power of our commander is so high that it's very likely we'll roll a 15 or higher. Now moving on, we are going on to our sorceries, and we have Aftershock, which is going to let us deal with any creature, artifact, or land. That's a lot of versatility. It does cost 4 mana, but it is going to hit us for 3 when we use it, so we're all for it. Chandra's Ignition is obviously a great way to finish off the game in this deck. If we get our Auntie Blyte big enough, we can just kill all of our opponents at once, which is awesome. Earthquake is one of our border wipes of choice because it's going to double up by dealing damage to each player, including ourselves. Faithless Looting is always a great source of card selection for red, and it's no different in this deck. Incite Rebellion's a pretty cool one. It's going to deal some damage to us, but probably not that much because we're not running too many creatures, but it can be very good against creature heavy decks by dealing a ton of damage to them, and it's just another way to put our opponents pretty low and finish off the game. Molten Disaster is basically another copy of Earthquake, and it's going to be pretty expensive if we play the kicker, but still it's good to have an option that can't be countered or responded to. Wheel of Misfortune is a pretty cool card that comes with this whole minigame attached to it, so you have to kind of bet life and see how much you bet to see what happens. Each player who bets the highest is going to take that much damage. We're totally okay with that, and if anybody bets the lowest, they don't get to discard their hand and draw 7 cards, so it's very likely that most of our opponents are not going to be taking any damage at all, but this is great because it just means we can use 10 damage, 15 damage, 20 damage, and hit ourselves with that much immediately, which means that our Auntie Blyte is going to get really big, really fast for only 3 mana. And then we're moving on to lands. We have Valakut Awakening, which is a great way to cycle through our deck and get some extra cards when we need to. We have Barbarian Ring that is going to deal 1 damage to us every time it's tapped for mana. Great. And then late game, if we really needed to, we can sacrifice it to deal 2 damage to anything. Bonder's Enclave is almost always going to be turned on, so it's going to be easy to draw cards with it. We also have a Desert sub-theme, starting with Desert of the Fervent, which is a cycling land. Grand Colosseum is going to deal 1 damage to us every time it's tapped. Inventor's Fair is going to gain us a little bit of life every turn. That's great. We can also eventually sacrifice it to find one of our lifelink artifacts, for example, so very solid. Kazul's Cliffs is Fling, which is something that's fantastic with a commander. When our commander is so big, we can use it in response to removal to just take somebody out of the game. Radiant Fountain just gains us 2 life when it comes in. We're happy with that. Ramunap Ruins is really good. Unfortunately, paying life is not the same as taking damage, so the first part's not going to work that well, but it's still a good way to close off games because it's a desert and we have a bunch of them, so we can sacrifice them to this. Scavenger Grounds is another desert. It means that we can exile multiple graveyards. Sunscorched Desert can be pretty good. It can deal 1 damage to us when it comes in, or to another player if we want it to, and it can just be then sacrificed to any of our deserts cards. War Room is going to allow us to draw some extra cards, which is great in any monocolored deck. And finally, probably the best land in the deck is Witch's Clinic, which is going to give a target commander lifelink. We absolutely love this land in this deck. So this has been our Auntie Blyte Bad Influence deck tech. What do you think about this deck tech? Are you as excited to play it as I am? Please let me know in the comments section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It's the best way to make sure the YouTube algorithm recognizes us. And until next time, take care.